Hey everyone, welcome to SideQuest English, the podcast where we step away from the boring textbooks to explore fascinating topics, one random deep dive at a time. Imagine, for just a second, sitting down for a very formal dinner party. To your immediate left is your deeply conservative grandmother. To your right are your absolute most raucous, completely unfiltered friends from your university days. And directly across the table sits the corporate executive who is deciding whether to offer you your dream job tomorrow morning. Now the room falls completely silent, and you are expected to tell a single joke that delights every single person at that table without offending anyone. It is an impossible, anxiety-inducing nightmare. Yet, if you really think about it, anyone holding a smartphone right now is living some version of this nightmare every single day on the internet.
Yeah, that dinner party scenario, it perfectly encapsulates the underlying tension we are unpacking today. We are exploring the modern battlefield of digital permanence, drawing from a rather formidable stack of analytical materials. We're going to examine sociological texts detailing how our disparate social circles have violently crashed into one another, legal frameworks concerning extrajudicial punishment, clinical psychology data on the true fallout of public humiliation, and even corporate communications theses on how to successfully beg for forgiveness.
Right, exactly. The overarching mission for you, the listener, is to really understand the mechanics behind this digital panopticon we've built. We're asking whether our fossilized past should inextricably dictate our present trajectory. I mean, we really need to ground this in how fundamentally bizarre our current reality is compared to the entirety of human history. For centuries, our social blunders, our ignorant teenage opinions, or our poorly thought out jokes enjoyed this natural built-in protection.
Built-in protection, exactly. One of our sources actually refers to this mechanism as practical obscurity. So if you wrote a highly controversial, perhaps downright offensive op-ed for a tiny college newspaper back in 1985, that physical piece of paper certainly existed in an archive somewhere. But weaponizing it against you 30 years later, that required someone to harbor a profound vendetta.
They would have to be incredibly motivated.
Highly motivated. They would have to physically travel to a specific university basement, negotiate with a librarian, and painstakingly scroll through miles of microfiche just to find it. The friction of retrieval was society's default privacy shield. The sheer effort required to unearth the past naturally filtered out casual malice.
But today, that friction is entirely gone. We are operating under the parameters of what the legal and sociological literature calls e-data protection, or rather, the catastrophic failure of it, right?
Right. The core crisis articulated in the research is that digital architecture is fundamentally monolithic and flawlessly indexed. It eliminates friction entirely. A digital artifact, whether it's a drunken photograph, a culturally insensitive tweet from a decade ago, or, a blog post written in the throes of teenage angst, it's instantaneously searchable by anyone, anywhere, at any time. Electronic data is entirely static. It is essentially frozen in time.
And humans, conversely, are the exact opposite of static. Our entire biological and psychological imperative is to evolve. We accumulate new information, we suffer through humiliating life experiences, we are exposed to diverse cultures, and our prefrontal cortex is literally finished developing. We change.
We do. And that biological reality clashes violently with the digital reality.
Okay.
Because when a hiring manager or a localized digital mob excavates a post from 2014, they are not assessing your present character, they are judging a fossil. They are extrapolating the moral fortitude of your current self based entirely on an outdated, lower resolution version of who you used to be.
Wow.
You are essentially stripped of the right to psychological maturation.
It is genuinely like walking into a high-stakes corporate job interview, sitting down in your tailored suit, while bearing an invisible, indelible transcript of every foolish thought you had at age 16 just stapled to your forehead. The HR director isn't just looking at your master's degree, they are reading the 16-year-old's diary over your shoulder and weighing both documents equally.
It's a dystopian picture for sure. But we do have to critically evaluate the mechanisms driving this surveillance too. The Seek Employer text in our source stack provides a counter-narrative that we can't simply brush aside here. From a purely operational standpoint, corporate entities argue they have a fiduciary duty to conduct comprehensive social media background checks. They aren't doing this out of sheer voyeurism.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because don't employers have a valid reason to do social media background checks? They need to eliminate resume discrepancies and assess what they call cultural fit. If you are hiring someone to represent a multi-million-dollar brand, you are engaging in risk mitigation. The Seek literature points out that if a candidate claims to possess a meticulous work ethic and states they were volunteering at a shelter all week, but a cursory glance at their Instagram shows them partying on a beach in Cabo during that exact time frame, well, the employer has intercepted a tangible liability.
The employer's operational imperative to protect their brand equity is logically sound in a vacuum. I completely concede that point. But when we zoom out and apply the sociological framework provided by linguist Jenny L. Davis and sociologist Nathan Jurgensen, a massive structural flaw is revealed. The tool the employers are using to gauge this cultural fit is fundamentally broken by a phenomenon Davis and Jurgensen term context collapse.
Context collapse. The phrasing makes it sound like a load-bearing wall giving out in a building, but, applied to human relationships.
That's a great way to think about it. It is a structural failure of identity management. So traditionally, human beings intuitively segment their identities based on the immediate audience. The vocabulary, the tone, the anecdotes you deploy when speaking to your grandmother are vastly different from the persona you adopt when drinking at a pub with your closest friend.
No, absolutely.
And that is distinct again for the professional veneer you maintain in a boardroom. We don't have one singular monolithic identity. We perform different iterations of ourselves, tailored to specific social contexts.
Right. We constantly code switch. We modulate our behavior to survive and thrive in different social ecosystems. It's just a basic social survival skill.
Precisely. And context collapse occurs when the digital architecture flattens all of these distinct, nuanced audiences into a single, unified demographic. Davis and Jurgensen identify two distinct variants of this phenomenon. The first is context collusion, which is a deliberate, intentional flattening by the user.
Okay, what does that look like in practice?
Think about your own social media feed right now, particularly on a platform like Facebook or LinkedIn. When you post a photograph of a family vacation, you are consciously aware that your boss, your mother, your ex-partner, and your college roommate might all view it simultaneously.
Right. So you run a subconscious algorithm before hitting post. You ask yourself, is my manager going to think this is unprofessional? Are my friends going to think I'm being incredibly boring? You end up playing to the lowest common denominator of offense. You curate this utterly bland, sanitized persona to survive the collusion of audiences.
Exactly. It forces a homogenization of identity. But the true peril, and the catalyst for the public shaming we're investigating, lies in the second variant, which is context collision. This is entirely unintentional and frequently catastrophic. A context collision happens when a piece of media intended for one highly specific, nuanced audience breaches its containment and crashes violently into an audience that lacks the necessary context to decode it properly.
So, returning to that dinner party analogy from the intro, it is the joke meant exclusively for your raucous college friends suddenly being broadcast over a loudspeaker to your conservative grandmother and your future boss.
Yes, and without the context of your shared history with those friends. The inside jokes, the implicit understanding that you are employing sarcasm or irony, the statement is interpreted literally by the outer circles, resulting in maximum offense. We saw this play out with devastating real-world repercussions in the text, specifically the case study regarding the model, Pinkston.
Oh yeah, that story was intense. The Pinkston anecdote is a textbook illustration of a context collision weaponized into a career-ending event. According to the research, statements she had made in the past, statements which were unequivocally deemed problematic and offensive by broader societal standards, were excavated and catapulted out of their original, likely localized context into the global digital arena.
And the speed and severity of the fallout were staggering. It wasn't a polite reprimand or a localized controversy. The context collision triggered an absolute avalanche. She didn't just lose followers, she received vitriolic hate mail and literal death threats flooding her inbox. The professional decapitation was instantaneous. Elite Model Management, one of the most prestigious agencies in the world, dropped her immediately.
Her international career just evaporated overnight. The punishment was absolute, unyielding, and completely bypassed any formal channels of arbitration.
The ethical dilemma explored in the e-data protection literature hinges on this exact severity. When a context collision occurs, the individual is effectively denied the right to contextualize their past. The digital mob locks them into the absolute worst interpretation of their worst moment. Beyond the immediate destruction of a career, the literature points to a pervasive, chronic psychological toll on the general populace, which is the burden of imagined surveillance.
Imagined surveillance. That sounds like living in a constant state of low-grade paranoia, like you're always being watched.
It operates very similarly to paranoia. Users develop an acute awareness of the imaginary audience. Because the internet never forgets, you are no longer just communicating with the people currently engaging with your content. You are forced to anticipate how a theoretical, potentially hostile audience 5 or 10 years in the future might purposefully misinterpret a post you make today.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. It induces chronic emotional stress, a persistent feeling of helplessness, and a defensive posture of relentless self-censorship. You are policing your own thoughts on behalf of a mob that hasn't even formed yet.
Which brings us to the most visceral part of this deep dive. Let's say the imagined surveillance becomes real. The context collision actually happens. An old, terribly phrased joke or an ignorant comment surfaces. The modern default reaction is not to ask for context, it is to immediately demand a head on a spike. We initiate a digital public shaming. But what is this actually accomplishing? Are we fixing society, or are we just participating in a blood sport?
To answer that, we have to transition from sociology to legal philosophy. The text we reviewed from Just Corpus at the ANU Open Research Library tackle this by framing modern digital shaming as a profound socio-legal problem. The core issue is that this form of retribution operates entirely outside the established parameters of democratic jurisprudence. It is, by definition, extra-legal punishment.
Let's break down what we mean by extra-legal, because I think we often take the mechanics of our justice system for granted. If you are accused of a crime in a functioning democratic legal system, there is a massive apparatus designed to protect you from the whims of a mob. You are afforded the presumption of innocence. You have the right to face your accuser. You have the right to due process, to present mitigating evidence. And most importantly, there is a mandate for proportionality in sentencing.
Exactly.
If you steal a candy bar, the state cannot sentence you to life in prison. And if the system gets it wrong, there is a mechanism for appeal.
And digital public shaming vaporizes every single one of those safeguards. It reverts society to a pre-Enlightenment model of justice. It's the modern, permanent iteration of the medieval pillory. The mob serves as investigator, prosecutor, judge, and executioner simultaneously. Once the digital collective brands an individual as guilty, the destruction of their reputation, their livelihood, and their mental health is frequently irreversible.
Even in cases where subsequent facts emerge that completely exonerate the individual.
Oh, absolutely. The internet rarely issues retractions with the same fervor as the initial condemnation.
The proportionality aspect is what makes it so terrifying to me. Because digital content is perfectly indexed and globally accessible, the punishment is infinitely disproportionate to the infraction. A bad Joe doesn't just earn you a stern talking to, it earns you global infamy that appears at the top of your Google search results for the rest of your life.
The permanence acts as a massive multiplier on the punishment. But what is truly concerning is the psychological fallout on the individual enduring this extra-legal punishment. We reviewed a fascinating discussion from the unfiltered trenches of Reddit, specifically the Rask philosophy community, where users debated the actual outcomes of being publicly humiliated.
That thread was incredibly revealing because it stripped away the academic jargon. A user astutely observed that when a human being is subjected to a massive public shaming, it virtually never results in calm, rational introspection. No one gets yelled at by 10,000 strangers and thinks, oh, you know what, they make some excellent points, I am going to embark on a journey of personal growth. Instead, the human brain perceives a profound existential threat and triggers extreme psychological defense mechanisms.
And the clinical data entirely supports that anecdotal observation. The Reddit user noted 2 primary reactions, both of which are corroborated by the research we analyzed from Psychology Today. The first reaction is absolute fear and avoidance. The shamed individual experiences a total collapse of their social standing, deletes their digital presence, and completely withdraws from society. They are terrified of ever expressing an opinion again. They do not learn, they simply hide.
And the second reaction is arguably worse for society, which is the anger response. The shamed individual's ego cannot handle the sheer volume of rejection, so they play the martyr. They convince themselves that the mob is entirely irrational, and out of pure spite and cognitive dissonance, they double down on the terrible behavior. They seek out fringe communities that validate their worst impulses.
Exactly.
In neither of these scenarios, the silent retreat or the angry doubling down, do we see anything resembling accountability or pro-social growth.
The Psychology Today research explains the underlying mechanism behind this failure. Public humiliation does not induce healthy guilt. It induces internalized toxic shame. Guilt is the realization that you did a bad thing. Shame is the deeply internalized conviction that you are a bad person. The research explicitly states that toxic shame fuels social withdrawal, severe anxiety, and depression.
So it's essentially destructive rather than constructive.
Fundamentally. If an individual harbors a negative habit or an ignorant belief, public shaming doesn't magically cure it through enlightenment. It merely drives the behavior underground into secrecy and deception. True rehabilitation requires social connectedness and educational dialogue, whereas shaming deliberately isolates the individual.
Okay, but wait. Here's where it gets really interesting, and I have to push back a little. If we follow this logic to its absolute conclusion, that public shaming is always a disproportionate, toxic sledgehammer that bypasses due process and causes psychological damage, how do we account for the massive systemic cultural shifts of the last decade? I am looking specifically at the ANU open research text that brings up Harvey Weinstein and the catalyst of the #MeToo movement.
That's a critical counterexample.
Right, because we cannot ignore that formal legal systems, complete with all those beautiful safeguards like due process and presumption of innocence, comprehensively failed for decades to hold powerful, wealthy abusers accountable. The system was rigged. It was only through the brute force mechanism of collective public shaming that the silence was finally shattered. Didn't collective public shaming actually serve a vital purpose there?
That is the essential counterweight to this entire discussion, and the academic literature does not shy away from that immense complexity. The ANU paper validates your exact point by introducing a vital concept, which is the expressive function of shaming. We have to differentiate between interpersonal squabbles and systemic power imbalances. When formal justice systems are paralyzed by corruption, complicity, or overwhelming wealth, public shaming transitions from being a tool of petty retribution to a tool of necessary moral self-defense.
So it becomes a way for a marginalized community to bypass a broken legal apparatus and loudly declare its own boundaries.
Precisely. For victims of powerful predators or marginalized groups facing systemic oppression, collective public shaming might literally be the only lever of power available to them. It forces a critical social norm into the spotlight, effectively broadcasting, look, the legal system may not punish this, but society unequivocally deems this behavior unacceptable. It is a democratized reassertion of moral boundaries.
That makes total sense. But applying the systemic justice of a #MeToo style cancellation to a teenager's bad joke is like using a course of aggressive chemotherapy to cure a scraped knee. It destroys the healthy social tissue along with the mistake. It's a fundamental misapplication of a highly destructive tool. We're using the weaponry designed to topple untouchable titans to annihilate normal people who just had a lapse in judgment.
That is a brilliant articulation of the core friction we are facing. And this is exactly the juncture where the RSIS study on university students' perceptions of cancel culture provides a really pragmatic roadmap forward. The students surveyed in this study exhibited a high degree of nuance, advocating heavily for a paradigm shift regarding those everyday infractions you just mentioned. The consensus in the literature is that we must move away from what behavioral psychologists term dispositional attribution.
Dispositional attributions, meaning we attribute the mistake to the core disposition or the soul of the person.
Yes. It is the reflexive heuristic urge to label someone's entire foundational character as irredeemably toxic based on a singular action. If you make an insensitive comment, the dispositional attribution dictates that you are, at your core, an evil person. The RSIS study argues we must transition towards situational attributions. This requires the cognitive effort to actually understand the context, the environment, the person's background, and the specific circumstances surrounding the mistake.
So instead of looking at a leaked 10-year-old video of someone saying something ignorant and concluding, you are a monster who must be exiled from the economy, a situational attribution approach says, you said something deeply ignorant, let's examine the environment you were raised in, why you thought that was acceptable humor at the time, and what educational steps we can take to rectify your understanding now.
Exactly.
It treats the person as a flawed human capable of learning, rather than a malfunctioning product that needs to be thrown in the incinerator.
The RSIS study emphasizes that genuine accountability, the kind that actually improves society, relies on restorative justice, not retributive exile. Restorative justice acknowledges that human behavior is dynamic. If the collective goal is to actually reduce harm and foster change, we must construct pathways for rehabilitation and dialogue. We have to stop slapping people with what the journalist John Ronson so aptly described as the digital scarlet letter. A mistake should ideally serve as an intense, perhaps painful opportunity for education rather than a permanent sentence to social death.
That philosophy makes total sense for a healthy society. But it is a two-way street. If the mob agrees to put down the pitchforks and offer a pathway to restorative justice, the burden falls incredibly heavily on the transgressor to actually make amends. So if restorative justice is the goal when you are caught in the crosshairs of a context collision, if you genuinely messed up and caused harm, what separates a genuine restorative apology from a calculated, passive-aggressive PR move designed merely to protect your brand.
The anatomy of a public apology is a science unto itself, and the literature is highly specific about what constitutes structural integrity in these moments of crisis. However, to understand what works, we first have to dissect the tactics that spectacularly fail.
Oh, we definitely have to start with the Wikipedia concept of the non-apology because it is maddeningly relatable to anyone who has ever consumed modern media. The absolute worst offender, the rhetorical trick that drives the public insane, is the evasion of the passive voice. The classic, mistakes were made.
Ah, yes, the linguistic distancing maneuver.
It is infuriating. Mistakes were made acknowledges a poor outcome while syntactically severing the speaker from any direct responsibility for creating that outcome. It treats the transgression like a weather event. It's like saying, a hurricane of bad decisions blew through the office and unfortunately harm occurred. It flatly refuses to say, I made a mistake.
The passive voice is a classic corporate evasion tactic designed to minimize legal liability while feigning contrition. But the literature highlights an even more pernicious, psychologically damaging variant, which is the insult and justification masquerading as an apology. This often takes the structural form of, I am sorry that some people were foolish enough to take offense at my completely rational comments.
That is just a covert secondary attack. You aren't apologizing for your actions or acknowledging any harm. You are actively apologizing for the audience's perceived stupidity and hypersensitivity. You are centering your own arrogance.
It shifts the locus of blame entirely onto the victim's emotional regulation. It is a fundamental refusal to yield the moral high ground. To understand the antithesis of this, what actually repairs a fractured relationship with the public, we turn to William Benoit's image restoration theory, which is a foundational text in crisis communication. Benoit posits that when an organization or an individual is genuinely guilty of a transgression, the most effective, statistically successful strategy involves two non-negotiable components: mortification and corrective action.
Mortification sounds intense, like you have to publicly flog yourself.
In Benoit's academic framework, mortification simply means accepting absolute, unmitigated fault. It means admitting the wrongdoing without deploying any caveats, without shifting blame to a subordinate, without citing supply chain issues, and explicitly asking for forgiveness. But mortification in isolation is insufficient. It is merely words. It must be inextricably linked to the second component, which is corrective action. This is a transparent, concrete, audible plan to repair the existing damage and systemic changes to guarantee the transgression never occurs again.
This maps perfectly onto the highly detailed thesis we reviewed by Yang Han. Han's research dives deep into the specific mechanisms of trust recovery during a severe brand crisis. Her data shows that for an apology to successfully cross the threshold into believability, it must contain a clear acknowledgement of the wrongdoing, expressions of genuine remorse, and an offer of tangible compensation or repair. But Han's study provided a truly fascinating, somewhat unexpected layer of demographic data regarding who actually delivers that mortification.
Yes, the intersection of gender expectations and crisis communication is highly revealing.
It blew my mind. Han's empirical data revealed that when a corporate apology involves accepting absolute full responsibility, true mortification, it is actually perceived by the public as significantly fairer, and it results in a vastly higher restoration of consumer trust when it is delivered by a female CEO as opposed to a male CEO.
We have to unpack the societal constructs driving that data, because it is certainly not arbitrary.
Right.
The underlying psychological mechanism here is rooted in deep-seated systemic gender biases. The public subconsciously attributes higher baseline levels of empathy, nurturing, and emotional authenticity to female leaders. When a male CEO delivers a strict, mortification-style apology, audiences often perceive a jarring cognitive dissonance. Society expects corporate stoicism and dominance from male executives, so their vulnerability is often read as calculated or forced by legal counsel. But when a female executive expresses vulnerability and takes the blame, it aligns with society's deeply ingrained, albeit stereotypical, expectations of feminine empathy, making the apology resonate as more authentic. It is a striking finding that proves the reception of an apology is never a purely logical process. It is heavily filtered through the heuristic biases of the audience. However, the data also suggests that regardless of the demographic profile of the apologizer, if the structural integrity of Benoit's theory is absent, the apology will categorically fail.
If we want to look at the absolute gold standard of structural integrity, the flawless execution of Benoit's theory, we have to bring up the anecdote from the pop culture chat Reddit thread. A user there cited the crisis response of the Canadian company Maple Leaf Foods. Now, the context here was not a minor PR gaffe, it was undeniably horrific. In 2008, they distributed tainted deli meat that resulted in a massive listeriosis outbreak. Tragically, this outbreak killed over 20 consumers, many of them elderly. It was an absolute worst-case scenario for a food manufacturer.
It was an existential crisis of the highest magnitude involving massive loss of human life. The standard corporate playbook in a liability nightmare of that scale is to obfuscate, delay, and let the lawyers dictate the passive voice.
Yet, their public apology is still studied in universities today as a masterclass in restorative crisis communication. Why? Because the CEO, Michael McCain, completely bypassed the lawyer's standard advice. He went on national television and did not deploy a single passive verb. He didn't blame lower-level sanitation employees, he didn't blame the complexity of the supply chain, and he didn't offer empty platitudes. He stepped directly into the fire, took unflinching personal responsibility for the tragedy, expressed profound, visible remorse for the lives lost, and then, crucially, he laid out a highly transparent, concrete roadmap of the exact systemic changes, the specific machinery upgrades, and the new safety protocols they were implementing immediately to ensure it could absolutely never happen again.
He executed mortification and corrective action perfectly. He absorbed the entirety of the blame. And that aligns seamlessly with the strategic mandates from the 5WPR source, a leading public relations firm whose internal data we analyzed. Their core directive is that an effective apology must center the victim, not the apologizer. A remarkably common disastrous mistake in modern influencer apologies, for example, is for the transgressor to center their own emotional growth journey.
Oh, the classic YouTube apology video. This has been such a dark, hard time for me. I've been crying for days, but I am learning so much about myself on this journey. Nobody cares how hard it has been for the person who caused the harm. You are not the protagonist of the pain you inflicted.
It's exactly the issue. Centering the self invalidates the victim. The 5WPR text also stresses the critical importance of the temporal element, which is timing. The apology must be issued rapidly but critically only after the core facts are undeniably confirmed. If you delay the apology for weeks, the public perception solidifies that your response is merely calculated damage control, a reaction to falling profit margins rather than a genuine manifestation of remorse. Furthermore, the scientific literature we reviewed, specifically the psychological research by Lewicki on the dynamics of trust repair, adds a vital layer regarding the delivery itself.
Right, because you can write the perfect Benoit-proof script, but if you read it like a robot, it doesn't work.
Precisely. Lewicki's data demonstrates that in face-to-face apologies or video broadcasts, the structural vocabulary matters significantly less than the nonverbal cues. The human brain is a highly evolved lie detector. Micro-expressions, sustained eye contact, appropriate facial distress, and most importantly, vocal inflection and pitch are the ultimate subconscious arbiters of sincerity. If your script hits every requirement of mortification, but your vocal pitch lacks genuine spontaneous distress, the audience's subconscious rejects the words entirely. The biology overrides the script.
It's terrifying, but deeply human. So let's try to pull all of these massive, disparate threads together and synthesize exactly what we've discovered in this deep dive. We are living in an era where our digital footprints are permanent, flawlessly indexed, and essentially immortal. Because of this lack of friction in data retrieval, context collapse is practically inevitable for every single one of us. When those collisions happen, the prevailing culture of public shaming acts as a disproportionate extra-legal judge. It operates on the adrenaline of rage rather than the careful scales of due process, frequently causing deep, toxic psychological harm and forcing individuals into silent isolation or radicalized anger rather than fostering any genuine rehabilitation. To survive this brutal landscape and to actually foster societal growth, we have to abandon the passive voice PR spins and our own bloodthirsty desire for digital retribution. We need to transition from dispositional to situational attributions and embrace genuine, vulnerable apologies that combine absolute mortification with concrete, structural corrective action.
That is a highly accurate, comprehensive summation of the complex literature we've explored today. And as we conclude, I want to leave the listener with a final, perhaps more profound philosophical consideration drawn directly from the text Justice in the Age of the Internet. In recognition of the suffocating permanence of digital data, the European Union has actually pioneered a fascinating legal framework known as the right to be forgotten. It is a piece of digital jurisprudence designed specifically to protect fundamental human dignity. It allows individuals to formally petition search engines to de-index outdated, irrelevant, or disproportionately damaging information about their distant past, effectively hiding it from casual public view.
It is essentially a legal mechanism attempting to artificially simulate the practical obscurity of the physical archives we used to enjoy naturally, a way to legally enforce the friction of retrieval.
That is precisely what it is. But the authors of the text raise a sobering point. Legislation can only act as a bandage. A law can force a multinational corporation to hide a hyperlink, but a law cannot fundamentally alter human behavior, nor can it satiate our cultural appetite for righteous indignation and scandal. The real enduring question is not technological, it is moral. It is a question for us as individuals and as a collective society. If our technology is fundamentally engineered to never ever forget, how do we systematically relearn how to forgive? Can we deliberately construct a new cultural architecture, a resilient set of social norms that actively accommodates human fallibility and champions redemption, rather than defaulting to perpetual static punishment?
That is a heavy, vitally necessary question. I highly encourage you to ponder that exact question the very next time you are scrolling through your feed, see a viral outrage, and feel that undeniable temptation to add your voice to the digital mob. Pause and ask yourself what you are actually trying to build. Thank you so much for joining us on this SideQuest English deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.